What's up guys, it's Patricia from tarantulaheaven.com. I've got my Chilean rose hair Spidey in the back of our tank right now. Hopefully she'll come to the front for you guys. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing if you like learning tarantula facts and hearing about observations about people's own tarantulas, because I do a lot of this on my channel. And today we're actually doing a bit of that. I'm sharing a horror story about what can happen if you leave food in your tarantula's tank. So I wanted to make a video that might be useful for beginners, sharing what I've learned along my journey about why you should never leave food in your enclosures. The most obvious that beginners should be aware of is the risk that uneaten food poses to your tarantulas. Many people know this, but it's always good to refresh. You should never leave food that is alive and uneaten in your tarantula's tank because it is a big danger to them. So if your tarantula starts molting or is in pre-molt to where it won't really be eating and will start actually rejecting food or not be interested in food, there is a chance that once your tarantula starts molting, this prey could actually turn on your tarantula and eat them. Tarantulas, when they're molting, are completely defenseless. They are so vulnerable, they will not be able to fight back. And so it is not unheard of for whether it's crickets, worms, cockroaches. It is not uncommon for these prey items to actually attack your tarantula and kill them while they're molting. So this is why you do not want to leave uneaten prey in your tarantula's tank. This is the biggest one, actually, because it could actually be a matter of life and death for your tarantula, and you do not want to feel that guilt. Another reason not to leave uneaten food in the tank is because they will make a mess. Tarantula owners put a lot of effort into their enclosures, and the nice thing about tarantula keeping is that as long as you're doing your spot cleaning and you're not getting anything like mold, mites, or anything like that, you don't have to change the tank that much. You could go perhaps 6 months or maybe even more if your tarantula's tank is staying nice. So you don't want these uneaten prey items to be walking around doing their waste, doing their gross things. In my experience, the worms are the worst as far as the tank because the worms are just stinky to begin with. And then they go throughout the substrate and they do weird stuff, and if they die, it makes the tank smell terrible. So you do not want these things messing up your tank and getting the substrate all gross. So for me, that was a big factor in why I decided to start feeding before I switched to roaches. Now that I switched to roaches, this doesn't happen much because Spidey actually eats them pretty fast, and they also don't burrow in the way that worms do. But before I switched to roaches and when I was doing the worms, I actually had to put Spidey and the worm in a different feeding container because the worms would just get away from her, and it was a terrible situation for the tank and safety concerns as well with Spidey molting perhaps. So I would definitely suggest that you stay on top of the prey and also choose a prey that is easy to keep track of and won't do things like burrow under the substrate where your spider may not be able to get them. So that's my complaint about worms. The other thing is, besides messing up your tank, these things might do perhaps worse things. So I had an incident where I was actually giving Spidey crickets, and crickets were not a good match for Spidey. She was too slow to get them and they were too fast. So I recall this one incident where I had given her a cricket, I left it in her tank for a few hours, and then I couldn't find the cricket anymore. So I assumed that she ate it. Well, a few weeks later, or I don't really remember the time frame, but not too long after that cricket disappeared, did I find cricket babies running around Spidey's tank. This cricket had been pregnant, and I guess she laid her babies, and so I had to do a complete tank change, which was really frustrating because I had actually just cleaned the tank right before putting that original cricket into the tank. So I had to do another tank change soon after and I probably could have gone several more months without cleaning it if that hadn't happened. When you get a big infestation like that in a tank, you don't even want to try to spot clean because there's just too much risk involved, and you're probably not going to get all of it, whether it's mice, fungus, mold, whatever. This stuff just spreads. So it's better to be safe than sorry. So yeah, I had to do a whole tank change because I left a cricket in there and then it decided to give birth. So learn from my mistakes and I hope it never happens to you because I was so mad. And then another horror story that I have about leaving food in the tank is another situation in which I had left a worm in Spidey's tank. So Spidey's feeding journey has kind of gone from crickets to worms to roaches. And I think she's gonna stay on roaches for the rest of her life because they're just the easiest for both of us. She can actually catch them and she enjoys eating them. And they're not smelly like the crickets or worms. And they actually reproduce very fast in their little prey container. So I've actually just been feeding her off of my original roaches because they keep reproducing. So it's like a self-sustaining colony. But anyway, so I had a separate feeding tank for Spidey when I was giving her worms. And I would put some substrate in this little container and I put the worm in there. And then Spidey, whenever she was ready, she could go in and out of this container. This worked actually very well for us because she could kind of take her time in getting them. It contained the worm so the worm couldn't get out of the container and mess up the rest of the tank. So this system worked very well. However, there was this one time where I left a worm in there and I thought she got it. And so, I guess my other advice would be to actually check if you can, like really thoroughly check if your tank isn't too big and if you don't have to mess up everything. So what had happened was I one day looked in her little tank, that was the feeding tank, and I saw that there was an actual like black beetle in there, and that is not something that I knew could happen, but apparently the worms have different life stages, the super worms, and like there's the gross larvae stage, and then I guess somewhere along the way, and it's been a while since I've looked at this information, so perhaps you want to do your own research. Somewhere along the way, it actually turns into a black beetle. It is disgusting. And so this was a big wake-up call for me because I was like, wow, I really need to check the feeding tank and make sure that she's eating because that thing might have been in there for a while. And I figured it was gone because I wasn't seeing any movement in that little tank. And I also felt like it would be fine because the likelihood of Spidey trying to molt in that tank would be very, very rare. And she probably couldn't even molt comfortably in there, so she wouldn't choose it as a molting spot. But I was careless on my part because really, in tarantula world, anything could happen, right? So yeah, there's a beetle, and I don't know what kind of risk that posed to her, but in the off chance that she molted in there, I wouldn't want her in there with a beetle or a worm, any of those things. So yeah, gross things can happen with the feeders. I do advocate for kindness to all living creatures. I will say that I'm very much more affectionate towards tarantulas than the feeders. There is a big part of me that thinks the feeders are really gross. And the only reason that I interact with them is because of my spiders, and I love them. So yeah, that would be my advice to you guys. Those are the reasons that I think you should totally stay on top of the feeders, learn from my mistakes and my horror stories. The feeders can not only be very dangerous to your tarantulas, but they can also just pose so many issues for your enclosures. And I know that most tarantula owners really put their heart and souls into their tarantulas enclosures. These tanks can sometimes be works of art where you've really carefully selected the decor or you've custom made things for your spider. And so you want to make sure that your tarantula and your enclosures stay really nice, clean, and healthy because it's a huge investment that you've made, not only emotionally, but time-wise, financially. That would be my suggestion. I think the easiest way to keep your tank maintenance really good and easy is just by keeping on top of the feeders and not allowing them to just run amok in the tank. So making sure that you can watch your tarantulas. I mean, it is okay to leave prey in there for a little bit because, sometimes our tarantulas, they don't attack immediately or they're waiting for the perfect moment. But I think what I've researched is that 12 to 24 hours, like if the tarantula has not eaten it by then, definitely take it out. And if you've got prey on the loose or your tarantula has like an elaborate tunnel system that the prey can get stuck in, I think you want to just make sure that you're right there and on top of it so that if they don't strike immediately, you can just take it out because the risks are too high. All right, guys, I hope that was really, really helpful. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next week for Tarantula Tuesday. Bye.